expert fighting against communism. I'm a young generation. I would like to guarantee with you, as Mr. Habib Mayas has mentioned to you recently, this is the time for us to destroy their ideology. We will win if we unite. We united with the action more than thought. I hope God will in our side. The liberation of all world anti-communists will be win in the near future. Thank you. Now I have a very special request. We ask only 3.5 minutes by the law of the chair. I would like to introduce you, Mr. Nguyễn Kim Cang, will announce what we need for us now.
Honorable Monsieur le Président, Mesdames, Mesdemoiselles, Messieurs, je me permets de vous présenter, je m'appelle Nguyễn Kim Cang, mon nom de plume, Nguyễn Anka, ancien journaliste, directeur du journal Pinson à Ceylon, capitaine du Vietnam libre avant 1977.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to ask you to allow me to introduce myself. My name is Nguyễn Anka, former editor-in-chief of Tân Sáng Daily News in Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam.
À l'occasion de votre présence d'aujourd'hui, vous êtes les membres parlementaires, professeurs et docteurs, étudiants et anciens militaires à toute race, etc., symbolisant la classe intellectuelle et élite dans la société.
Today, on this occasion, with the presence of the members of Parliament in the United Kingdom, deputies, professors, doctors, students, and military personnel of all grades, as a symbol of the educated people in this society.
Je voudrais vous faire remarquer notre sort.
I would like to make a remark for our destiny.
Honorable Monsieur Frédéric M. Pennec vous a fixé un discours condamnation de la Russie communiste envahissant Afghanistan.
Recently, Honorable Sir Frederick M. Bennett, in his speech on the condemnation of the communist Russians invade Afghanistan,
Je vous prie, Mesdames, Messieurs, de réfléchir, de penser aussi le destin du Sud-Vietnam.
I would like to ask you to think about a little bit on the destiny of the South Vietnam.
Malgré le traité de la paix à Paris au début de l'année 1972, les communistes du Nord l'ont déchiré et trahi.
Luckily, the Paris Treaty signed on late January 1972 was violated and torn apart by the North Vietnamese communists, and old co-senator, and the treaty was kept silent under the invasion of the communist forces.
Et les co-signataires de ce traité ont laissé tranquillement des communistes venant du Nord, ont laissé tranquillement l'agression des communistes venant du Nord.
I repeat the phrase, I just translated.
Veuillez
Right.
Veuillez arriver, Mesdames, Messieurs, à nous aider en soulevant le problème du Sud-Vietnam dans toutes les conférences, dans toutes les conversations, pour que la conscience du monde entier ne soit ensommeillée.
Honorable Member of Parliament of the United States, ladies and gentlemen, would you please help us by mentioning the Vietnam cases in any conferences, any conversations, on behalf of the conscience of the free world, so they can awake?
Just a minute. Mr. Guangxi, may I ask you maybe to proceed directly with the English text? We will save a little bit of time.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Excuse me for intervening.
For the humanities, for the love of human beings, I would like to ask you, ladies and gentlemen, to think the destiny about 300 young Vietnamese girls, so-called boat people. They were kidnapped by the pirates on the Thai seas. All those poor young Vietnamese girls were sold in the whole house somewhere in Bangkok, Thailand. For many years, our Vietnamese and overseas, we are lacking of means to save and liberate them out of the darkness life. But since yesterday, when I first came to the conference, I saw the themes, freedom for the nations, freedom for individuals. These marvelous phrases elevated my feeling and my hope. Now, with your prestige, with your great influence in the international relationship and your means. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please help us by mentioning the case of the 300 young Vietnamese who were in the hand of the unheming period at old conference and old conversation.
Ang takbiran, ang tangdong kongrevisi politik Vietnamian, ang basic vice président du PEN Vietnam d'outre-mer, je vous envoie ici, mesdames, messieurs, mes amis, mes confrères, et aussi votre famille, mes salutations distinguées et mes sincères et chaleureuses remerciements.
Before closing my remarks, on behalf of the Vietnamese refugees in Belgium and Vice President of the Vietnam Pen Club and overseas, I would like to send you all of my best wishes and to say to all distinguished guests. Thank you.
May I give the floor now to Reverend Wallace, which comes from Nicaragua.
I want to say in my wife's native tongue, Naksa, which means hello. My wife told me that if I was given 5 minutes, I had better take only 4, or she was going to get on to me when I got back home. Sometimes I would rather fight the Sandinista than my wife. I just want to say very briefly a few comments about the mosquitoes, and then I want to introduce to you my wife, who is a new type of rebel leader or freedom fighter in Latin America. Some of you actually met her when the WACL conference was being held in Dallas in September. She came up and made a 10-minute speech. The Mosquito Indians is a group of Indians in both Nicaragua and in Honduras. They are not Spanish origin, they are English and European origin. They do not have Spanish names, but they have English names, they have German names, they wear American and European type of clothing. Their culture is European and English. Their religion is Protestant, predominantly Moravian. Now that doesn't sound too Indian, but let me tell you, we are very, very much Indian. Our people have fought the communists, and we have died for our freedom. This is the first time in the history that Mosquito Indians have taken up and actually fought to death for what they believed in. Under General Somoza, we were very passive people, and General Somoza allowed us to be on our own with every freedom that you can imagine. But then the Sandinista came in and said, we are not going to give you any freedoms because you do not deserve it. You do not really care for the Sandinista. And that was the biggest mistake that the Sandinista has ever made. They told the Mosquito Indians that they were nothing. Our young men have gone out and fought with rifles that have actually fell apart in their hands during battle. We have gone out and fought for days in the jungle with no food except some jelly beans that we were able to get from children selling them in the street. We had no medicine, and our fighters have their feet that are actually rotting off from what we call jungle leprosy. But we keep on fighting because we who are Mosquito Indians are going to be free someday. I could tell you all about the atrocities that have happened, but I would only be repeating what every one of you know by heart. Dropping of children and women out of helicopters, packing helicopters with 80 to 90 children and then letting the helicopter crash. Taking mothers who were pregnant and ripping their stomachs open and pulling out the unborn children, putting old people in their church and then setting the church on fire, going into the villages and say, we love you, but we're going to have to burn your schools, your hospitals, your houses down, and we're going to have to kill your pigs, and we're going to have to force march you 200 miles through the jungle and the mountains so that the Contras cannot get to you and kill you. And you know what? At the end, concentration camps. So I could go on and tell you about that. But I want to tell you quickly about my wife, who happens to be a young person of only 41 years of age. Someone came here and said, we are getting old. What will the young people do when we go? I would like to tell you there are young people now who are actually fighting, and they are excellent leaders, not only for Latin America or Central America, but they are those that can come here and speak in all of the capitals of Europe. And they can do the same job that you're doing today. When my wife married me, she came to America carrying a suitcase about this big. That was her worldly possessions. And I didn't have any more because I only had $10 in my pocket when we got married. We got $11 now. When my wife was 36 years old, she said to me that she had made 2 mistakes in her life. I said, what are they, honey? She said, 1, I married you. 2, when I became an American citizen, I registered as a Republican and I voted for Jimmy Carter. I said, honey, in November you can remedy one of them. She said, that's the wrong one. She said, Jimmy Carter gave my canal away in Panama. Now, my wife is an American citizen by naturalization. She is the strongest naturalized American I have ever seen. She stood up in a midst of 300 radical communist students in a university in San Antonio and said that she did not vote for Reagan. She voted for General Haig, and Reagan was only secondary. Because at that time, General Haig, the Secretary of State, was more stronger than Reagan. My wife left me when I escaped, and I did not see her for 1 year. I did not know if she was alive or dead. But then when I found her, she had just escaped from prison herself. And she would tell me certain things that she did, and then other people would tell me. She met personally President Ortega and Prime Minister or Minister of Interior Thomas Borge. And she got up in front of them and said, both of you are bugs, and this is what I do to bugs. She threw a bug down on the ground and stomped on it in front of those two communist leaders. She also called General Somoza before the war a liar to his face. President Ortega held up a pamphlet in a meeting of the Mosquito Indians and said this pamphlet, written in 3 languages, is a very beautiful piece of work. It says in here that we are communists. It says that we are traitors to the Nicaraguan cause. It says that we are murderers. It says that we kill. Now, I want the person who wrote this to please raise his hand. I want to congratulate him for doing such a magnificent job of condemning us. My wife shot her hand up, and the people around her said, "No, you're going to die." She said, "They asked me the question, and I am going to answer them." She said, "I was not created by God to be afraid of any man." And she said, "I am a leader. I am not the greatest leader of the people, but I am the one that is the most necessary at this moment." And so she stood up and told the people that she was the one who was against the communists. They asked her, "Please come over and be one of us. Be one of the new leaders of the Mosquito." She said, "Sir, you can take my car, you can take my home, you can take my money, my clothes, my house, anything that I have got. But what God has given me, it is not for sale. My moral values, my convictions, my conscience, my attitudes, my patriotic love for democracy and freedom are not for sale." And she said, "Furthermore, the only way you're going to get them from me is to take my life, and I will still be better off than any of you. Because even in death, I am still the winner." She says about her people that God gave them a backbone and they had better use it. And she says that the only way that her people can come out of this bondage is through education. Now, my wife is only 41 years of age, and she was recently elected the first woman to the Council of Elders of her tribe in the history. She rejected that election to become the advisor to the elders. She is now also advisor to the political board, the military board, and the general council of her tribe. She has never been able to go back to Nicaragua since she escaped. And they wanted to kill her. But recently, she went to the border, which is a river between the two republics, Honduras and Nicaragua, and she swam across that river and reached the other shore and grabbed a handful of mud and said, "Thank God I'm home. I'm free. And then she swam back to the other side. So that's the only time that she has touched her homeland since 1980. Recently, she asked to go back to Nicaragua. She wanted a visa. And the people said, we will give you a visa because the amnesty is running out and you can go back. But they said simply, you've got to give us 2 references. This was the Nicaraguan embassy in Honduras. She said, well, all my friends are in exile or dead. My family, who 12 has gone to prison for their Christian belief, and 6 have died there since the war. The only 2 people that can give me a reference would be the president of this republic and the minister of the interior, so I'll just put their name down. So the 2 people who hate her most are the ones that she said would recommend her. That, my friend, is courage, and that is determination. And you know, my wife and I work with 5,000 children daily who have cancer. We live with there and work with them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. She's the mother of these children, and she's given her own blood to save these children's lives.
Reverend Wallace, I will complain to your wife that you are taking too much time.
Please, no. I'm finishing, really. I'm finishing. But we are also working with 20,000 children who are Mosquito Indian children who are starving to death. But I want to say in closing that what we're saying is to please give us a helping hand. Lift us up. Let us be family with you. But then give us the dignity to be our own leaders, even if we fail. But thank God we have the privilege to run, to stumble, to fall, to get up, to run, to stumble, to fall, to get up, run, stumble, fall, and get up, and then finally, with the Lord's help, to succeed. Please keep these children, these 20,000 children who are dying in the jungles at this very moment, keep them in your prayers. Someone asked, how long can you keep them alive for a year? How much money? $25,000. But we don't have it. But the other thing, keep my wife in your prayers, because she is the jewel at this moment of Nicaragua. She is the strongest Mosquito woman or man, either in freedom or in captivity today. And she is the most feared by the Sandinista at this moment. So please keep her in your prayers so that God can protect her, that she can lead her people out of bondage. Thank you.
May I assure Reverend Wallace as well as Mr. Kwang Si that no matter how far their homelands are, we here are completely with the destiny of their nations fully in our hearts. Thank you very much. Thank you. May I ask Mr. Tomasumas from Lithuania to take the floor.
Delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I try to be very brief and short. This year, it comes 45 years ago, Soviet occupation and Lithuanian uprising in June 1941. On 15th of June 1940, Soviet Union army occupied Lithuania. As a result of signed Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in August 1939. By doing so, Soviet Union broke the treaty signed on 12th of July 1920, which recognized Lithuanian independence. A year later, on 22nd of June 1941, Hitler armies smashed across the new frontiers of the Soviet Union, which were drawn by the Hitler and Stalin themselves 2 years earlier. The importance of this momentous event is still felt on both sides of divided Europe. The hope of the majority of the people of Central and Eastern Europe at that time was that the totalitarian giants would destroy each other. That hope was only fulfilled partly. The Soviet system survived as a warden in its prisons of nations. Most Western historians and journalists are still unaware of the events in 1941, which was unique in Lithuanian history of the World War II. Historians have to make a lot of homework. As the German army started pouring into Lithuania, a popular uprising swept the nation. It is estimated that anywhere between 18,000 and 100,000 Lithuanians participate in uprising which claimed about 4,000 dead. The uprising was made intensive by the fresh memory of mass deportation started a week ago from Lithuania to Siberia, of Lithuanian intelligence, all sorts of people, teachers, officers, and so on. The insurgents formed a provisional government and declared on June 23rd the restoration of Lithuanian independence. This Lithuanian self-secession was an unpleasant surprise for the German government, which planned to colonize and Germanize what is called the Eastern Land, Ostland, it's in Germany. The Gestapo planned an immediate arrest of the members of the provisional government. But the German military high command objected to such measures, afraid that they might undermine the war efforts. The development in Lithuania were not mentioned in the German press. Berlin stepped in by announcing the appointment of the commissars of the German civilian administration in Lithuania. In Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. On August 5th, 1941, the German Commissar General for Lithuania, von Rentul, summoned the members of the provisional government and declared that he has taken over the civil administration and the activity was finished. In defiance of this order, a couple of days later, the ministers of provisional government issue a joint statement in which they reasserted that Lithuania liberated itself by means of the armed uprising and that the Germans should treat it as independent. The Germans cracked down and made the functioning of the provisional government impossible. The full history of the Lithuanian uprising in 1941 remains to be written, since some sources are still unavailable. It is important, however, it's indisputable. What we have here is major national uprising against foreign occupying power, which still claims today that it enjoys almost complete popular support. The uprising was not organized and guided by the Germans, as the Soviet historiography would like to have it. Some of the leaders of the uprising ended in the prisons and concentration Nazi camps. They are the mass of the participants and have no illusion about the Nazi goals in the East. It was the same organized movement of the Lithuanian resistance that subsequently refused to join in Nazi war efforts or to fight against the Allies. It was the same spirit that enabled Lithuanians to thwart the Nazi efforts to form national SS Legion in Lithuania. It is only in 3 occupied European countries the Nazis failed to establish such a legion, including Lithuania. German command in a rage, closed Lithuanian University and high schools. The uprising of 1941 is yet another demonstration of the Lithuanian people's will to independence and their readiness to bear supreme sacrifices for it. The guerrilla war against Soviet intruders during 1944 and 1952 was very heavy sacrifice. Other people lost their lives and was taking thousands to Siberia. In general, as a result of both occupations, German and Soviet Union, in a war and just between 1952, Lithuanian nation lost 700,000 citizens. Can we see as its continuation, the same spirit forms the grassroots, Rus patriotic movement in Lithuania today. In the Central Eastern European context, the Lithuanian uprising of 1941 is not a quixotic aberration, but belongs to the sequence of popular revolutions for freedom and independence, as those in Budapest 1956, Prague 1968, Gdansk 1980, and the ones yet to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tomasunas. Unfortunately, the next speaker, Mr. Shublak from Ukraine, is ill, but his statement will be read by Mr. Fiegel.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, Honorary Presidium, ladies and gentlemen. Over the last few years, while the free world has been passively awaiting an improvement in relations with the Russian Empire and its succession of new leaders, Ukraine, together with the very many other enslaved nations, has been experiencing repression of a kind unknown since the era of Stalin. As part of this cruel repression, we have seen the elimination of all those well-known groups and individuals who have shown open dissent to the regime. Valery Marchenko, Oleksa Teke, Yuri Litvin, and Vasil Stus have been silenced forever by torture and murder. Scores have been dismissed from their jobs and deprived of their livelihood, only to be later accused and tried for being parasites of the Soviet society. At the same time, numerous laws have been enacted with the sole aim of curtailing all forms of contact with the outside world. Strict censorship of all mail, incoming and outgoing, continues, with many letters never reaching their destination. All forms of material support for the West have been stopped, and personal contacts with visitors from the West are regarded as treasonable offenses. It is not difficult to discern the reason for this renewed repression. Its aim is to spread fear, to isolate and paralyze the will of the enslaved people, and to create a sense of hopelessness, leading finally to submission. The repression is complemented by a venomous campaign of propaganda on the radio, on television, in the press, and in other publications aimed at discrediting the Ukrainian liberation movement, its history, and its past and present leaders both in Ukraine and in exile. Singled out for special attention have been His Holiness, the Patriarch of the Ukrainian Catholic Church, the late Cardinal Yosef Slipy, and our Prime Minister and President of the Anti-Bolshevik Bloc of Nations, the Honorable Yaroslav Stitsko. The lies and falsehoods emanating from the Russian leadership have known no bounds. Nothing has been spared in order to ridicule and compromise the Ukrainian national leaders. They believe that this will succeed in devaluing the Ukrainian national aspirations and deprive the national leaders of their support and following at home and of their allies abroad. However, despite this, the spirit and the will of the enslaved Ukrainian people remains steadfast, just as it always has in the face of such odds. Indeed, the resolve to continue the struggle for self-preservation and national freedom is stronger now than ever before. We have witnessed the emergence of new forms of active and passive resistance. No sooner have the ruthless state machine and KGB sought to plug one hole than a new channel for national expressions opens up. The tide of Ukrainian nationhood has reached such proportions, it has spread its roots so deep and wide that even the might of the Russian Empire is powerless to stop it, let alone reverse it. Its power base lies in the solidarity of all sections and of all age groups within the Ukrainian people. The struggle of industrial and agricultural workers against their serfdom is the struggle for national independence. The class problem is the national problem. To the Ukrainian people, the constitutional question is merely a question of secession from the Russian Empire. The concept of a reformed, liberal, democratic Moscow Empire is a concept alien to the Ukrainian nation. For the Ukrainian people, the alternatives cannot be clearer. It is either Kyiv or Moscow. The strength of the Ukrainian nation lies in its history. We know that Ukraine is the sole custodian of the traditions of Kievan Rus. This heritage remains an integral part of the Ukrainian culture. The forthcoming celebrations of the 1000th anniversary of the coming of Christianity to Ukraine will further heighten this national awareness and strengthen the national revival. The free world should cease its futile attempts at reforming the Russian Empire and instead should give full moral and political support to the enslaved people in their struggle for national independence. This support must be of a practical nature, for declarations, however noble, are of little help. The free world should expand the flow of information, encourage free thought, support the campaign for human and national rights, and promote establishment of independent trade union movements. It should also extend broadcasting to all those nationalities not yet covered by programs in their own languages. The questions raised in the samizdat journals should be given prominence in such broadcasts, and the truth about the oppressive nature of the Russian Empire should be given far greater coverage. The free world cannot sit idly by while the enslaved nations of the Russian Empire strive unceasingly for their independence. If the West fails to respond positively to this challenge, then not only is this cause of the enslaved nations doomed to failure, but so is any attempt by the West to seek coexistence with the Russian Empire. Make no mistakes. The struggle of the captive nations is the same struggle as the struggle of the free world for the continuation of its freedom. The free world will not live free and safe until the enslaved nations of the Russian Empire are also free and safe. Ours is the same battle. Our fate will also be the same. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was the last contribution concluding this panel. I believe I can express our gratitude to all participants in the panel. I also believe that their contributions will help us to have a better understanding for the idea of law frontier. That means these are the problems which create the real tension in the world. They are at the root of the armament competition, and they can be resolved only if everybody understands, although on the highest level, that freedom is indivisible, and that true peace could be achieved only through freedom for all nations. I believe now Mrs. Tetsko has to make some announcements.
Thank you very much. We have one item more on our agenda. It is the acceptance of ABN resolutions. And after that, we are all invited by Ukrainian Association Great Britain to have dinner here. And I hope we will have also a little cultural entertainment as well. I would ask the chairman of the resolution committee, Mrs. Potter, to present the resolutions.
Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the time. You've all been very patient. I implore you, this is the heart of the conference. It will not take long. It will take about 11 minutes. Thank you. Last night, the resolution committee met, and we're presenting to you these resolutions for your consideration and hopefully approval. ABN Conference Resolutions, London, November 21 through 24, 1985. Whereas the national liberation processes inside the Soviet Russian Empire are growing in strength and undermining the empire and its communist system, and whereas the Bolshevik tyrants confirm this in their emphasis on the necessary struggle against the so-called bourgeois nationalism and against religion, and whereas the chronicle of the underground Ukrainian Catholic Church in Ukraine and the underground chronicle of the Catholic Church in Lithuania, the armed struggle of the Afghan Mujahideen, and the struggle of the Polish people testify to this fact with regard to all other nations. Whereas the young generation raises the standard in the struggle for defense of national dignity and traditions, the cult of national heroes, religious values, inherent national ideals, institutions and cultural treasures, and courageously combat an imposed communist way of life based on total terror. And whereas the struggle of the subjugated nations in the Soviet Russian Empire is invincible because the nations defend their very existence in separate, organic, and spiritual entities. And whereas the endeavors will reach its zenith through the armed struggle against the occupant, Russian imperialist colonialism yoke. And whereas the constant shortage of bread and in general the bankruptcy of the economy of the USSR is confirmed by its own leaders when they state that this system is only at the beginning of the first phase of the so-called developed socialism. Therefore, be it resolved that the ABN Conference considers it of utmost importance for world freedom that An overall global strategy, including psychostrategy, should be developed by the free world against the global attack of Russian imperialism and communism, which seeks to conquer the entire world. The freedom fighter movement should be backed on international forums, receive modern technological and electronic equipment from the Western powers for political, psychological offensive, and even military aid, according to the UN resolution of Namibia. The freedom fighter leaders should be publicly received by leaders of the free governments, and the National Liberation Formation should be recognized as legal representatives of the subjugated nations against their oppressors. The media should provide frequent coverage of the anti-communist national liberation movements and insurgencies. International news broadcasts beamed to the Soviet Union and its satellites should place special emphasis upon national liberation insurgencies against Russian and communist dominations, e.g. the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, the Lithuanian Liberation Army, the Turkestani Bashmachi, the Polish Home Army, Armia Krajova, the Belarusian freedom fighters, the Afghan Mujahideen, the freedom fighters of Angola, Nicaragua, Mozambique, Ethiopia, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and many others of the past and present times. The freedom fighters should be assisted in establishing information centers in major cities abroad. Films and books on the anti-communist national liberation insurgencies, on concentration camps, the genocidal, artificially imposed famine in Ukraine in 1932-33, on psychiatric asylums, the Bolshevik Holocaust, on heroes of the national liberation struggle against Soviet Russia and communist oppressors, on the catacomb church, on the believers in God, martyrs, on the heroic prisoners, such as Yuri Shukevich, should be prepared for general public distribution in the free world. The free world should allocate sufficient financial and economic resources to the liberation struggle to enable the national liberation, anti-communist, anti-Soviet Russian movements, respective insurgencies to win, since supporting insurgencies, it costs much less than fighting a conventional war. The West should cease to supply grain, technology, credit, and arms to the Soviet Union and its satellites. Western trade has only served to sustain the tyrannical Russian Empire. The ABN Conference condemned the systematic Russification of all nations subjugated by Russian imperialism, aiming to create a Soviet people, a Russian supernation, and appeals to the free world to refrain from calling and considering the subjugated nations in the USSR as one Soviet people. The ABN Conference condemned Soviet Russia for its total denial of religious freedom and the persecution of religious leaders such as Joseph Terela and Vasil Kobrin. The ABN Conference condemned the slow murders of Ukrainian cultural leaders such as Oleg Sateky, Valery Marchenko, Yuri Litvin, Oleksiy Nikitin, Vasil Stus, as well as the mass executions of members of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, AOUN, and the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, UPA. The ABN Conference, demanding the application of the 25-year-old UN resolution on decolonization to the last existing empire. The Communist Russian Empire unwaveringly stands for the dissolution of this empire and the subsequent reestablishment thereof of national, independent, democratic states within their ethnographic territories. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, North Caucasus, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Turkestan, Ida-Ural, Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, Serbia, Slovenia, Croatia, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, Albania, Nicaragua, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and many other people. On the 40th anniversary of the creation of the United Nations, the USSR and its satellite countries, which violate the UN Charter by conducting mass genocide and wars of aggression, employing the use of chemical and bacteriological weapons against women and children, and sponsors international terrorism, should be excluded from this international body. The UN must cease to be a forum for disinformation campaigns aiming at discrediting the freedom-loving world, in particular the United States, the National Liberation, Revolutionary, Anti-Communist Organization, Their centers and spokesmen should be accepted into the framework of the UN as the true representatives of the nations subjugated by Bolshevism. The ABN demands, just as it did before the Belgrade Conference, to officially proclaim the Helsinki Accord null and void, since these accords affirm the status quo of Russia's communist expansionist occupation, and thus render a priori the issue of human rights of the subjugated nations unattainable. The defenders of national and human rights in the Soviet Union, who were hitherto clandestine fighters, were themselves vulnerable to persecution by publicly appealing to the Helsinki Accord without any help or protection from the free world. The ABN Conference demands that the International Red Cross Convention regarding the legal and equal treatment of insurgent armies be respected in the struggle against the Bolshevik invaders. The ABN Conference appeals to the nations of the Third World, many of which liberated themselves during the last decade, to support the freedom, justice, national independence, and human rights against the evils of tyranny, despotism, neocolonialism, and totalitarianism of the Russian imperialists and communists together with a proxy. The nations of the free world must work towards the liquidation of slave labor concentration camps and psychiatric prisons, the cessation of genocide, such as the famine siege of Ukraine, and the liberation of political and religious prisoners. The means to achieve this is through economic boycotts of the USSR, its exclusion from international organization, and the development of powerful psychological warfare. The ABN Conference appeals to the U.S. government, the U.S. Congress, and to all free nations to establish a center for psychological warfare within NATO or the Pentagon, which would include spokesmen for the national liberation organizations of the subjugated nations. We ask that a Freedom Academy be created, specializing in the analytical study of the problems of the subjugated nations, working out a psychostrategy and the training of cadres as a counterpart to the Lumumba University in Moscow. The ABN Conference supports the U.S. Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI program, which aims to liquidate weapons of mass annihilation and to establish a defense for human beings against Bolshevik aggression. The conference emphasizes, however, that the Russian Empire cannot be dissolved and victories for the free world against communism cannot be attained without the use of offensive forces. The offensive weapons which can achieve this is the liberation struggle of the subjugated nations. Without a low frontier strategy, a high frontier defense is but a variant of the anachronistic balance of power system in an epoch experiencing a global rise of national liberation struggles. The synthesis of the high and the low frontier strategy, SDI, in the liberation struggle of the subjugated nation, if supported by the free world, would solve the current global political crisis caused by Russian aggression. The concept of balance of power does not take the third superpower, the subjugated nations, into consideration, and is anachronistic to an epoch experiencing a global rise of national liberation struggle against Russian communist imperialism. The only alternative to a thermonuclear holocaust is a coordinated national liberation struggle of nations subjugated by Bolshevism, thereby destroying the empire from within and abolishing the communist totalitarian Orwellian-type system. The ABN Conference recommends this strategy as the only reliable means of saving mankind from thermonuclear destruction. ABN Conference appeals to the free world to help by all means, in particular with modern weapons, to those nations which fight already with the arms in their hands against communism slavery, imposed on them by Moscow and its hirelings. In particular, in Afghanistan, Nicaragua, Angola, Cambodia, Vietnam, and other freedom-loving people in Asia, Latin America, and Africa. ABN Conference supports the liberation struggle of the Cuban nation and appeals to the free world to help Cuban freedom fighters to overthrow Castro. If that succeeds, this would create a great blow to the Soviet-Russian proxy for the freedom-loving, and also, a great blow to the Soviet-Russian expansion in Africa, where Castro troops carry out Soviet-Russian proxy war against the freedom-loving African people. We demand that the Soviet Union stop the military material and arms delivery shipment to the government of Nicaragua, as well as other countries in Central America. ABN Conference supports the freedom fighters of FDN, headed by the Unidad Nicaragüense Opositora, UNO, which is trying to liberate the people of Nicaragua. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, the last resolution I have has been presented by the U.S. contingency, by the U.S. delegates. I would also like to include this in the resolutions. Whereas the State Department has revealed a lack of understanding of the importance of psychological warfare by returning the Ukrainian political refugee, Miroslav Medved, back to the Soviet ship, Marshal Konyev, disregarding the right of political asylum. Whereas the decision of the U.S. Senate Committee, chaired by Senator Jesse Helms, as well as the appeal of the President of the AFL-CIO, Mr. Lane Kirkland, and of the broad circles of the American public in favor of Miroslav Medved, were grossly ignored by the U.S. State Department. Therefore, we demand that the State Department should resume the case of Miroslav Medved, since it has done irreparable damage to the cause of the subjugated nations and all freedom-loving people, in order to prevent a similar situation of ever occurring, destroying the American tradition to grant political asylum to refugees. It is also resolved that we express our sincere appreciation to Senator Jesse Helms, the entire U.S. Senate Committee of Agriculture, as well as the Senate, the Judiciary and Foreign Relations Committee of the House of Representatives, President of AFL-CIO, Mr. Lane Kirkland, and the American public at large, which defended the right of a political refugee from an evil empire, the Ukrainian Miroslav Medved. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Potter. Is some comment or some recommendation? Please, Mr. Tang Si.
My name is Wang Shi. Mr. Chairman, my name is Trung Quang Shi. On behalf of the Third World Anti-Communist League, on behalf of the World Youth Anti-Communist League, on behalf of the Young Vietnamese for Freedom, we greatly support a very clear and specific resolution issued by the ABN Conference in London on today's date at this time. Thank you very much.
Yes, Mr. Moore.
Mr. Chairman, among the liberation movement, I don't know whether it was the title it didn't hear or whether it was omitted, creation liberation movement. And I would like to be put in with the rest.
May I answer before Mrs. Potter finds it? As I remember, there was clear statement for independence of Croatia.
Yes, that's true. Yes. But among the liberation movements, creation liberation
I
movements,
think there was general statement about not specifying. We didn't specify. Could you find, Mrs. Potter? Anyhow, if there is not mentioned and others are mentioned, we would suggest to add.
Thank you very much.
I will add that.
Mr. Mason.
I just want to make an additional comment about a very serious incident which it appears even people here have forgotten, and that shows how short memories can be. I have an additional wording, and I'd like to put it to you. The EFC ABN